Thank you very much, everyone, for joining the session. My name is Ben Walton. I'm Global VP for Consumer Insights at GfK. GfK as a business is going through a transformation of its own at the moment, where we're focusing in more on digital technologies, both in the money we invest and also the categories and the industries we look to engage with. But the inspiration for today's presentation is actually one of our most long-standing and established data assets, which is our Roper Consumer Life Survey. And this has been a survey we've been running since 1997. And essentially what we do is every year we go out to 30,000 consumers of age 15 and above, and we essentially track their values, their attitudes and their behaviours across over 25 markets. What we do with this data set as one of the main use cases is we look at generations basically and how they evolve over time. So I'm assuming this isn't the first time you've been sat at a conference like this listening to someone like me talking about generations, but I'm going to do it anyway. But there is a good reason for doing that, and as an industry what we continue to do is look at generations from the baby boomers to most recently millennials, which, believe it or not, I'm supposed to be part of. And now we're at generation now. So if you excuse the slightly cheesy phrase, why now? Now. So to put it very simply, this generation is going to be a massive consumer segment for retailers and manufacturers alike going forward. And by 2020, they will account for a third of the global population. But jokes apart, even though you do see a lot of these presentations, generations do matter. And what we know over time is that generations have driven how people interact with products and services, how we consume media, and most recently it's completely changed how we communicate as a species in itself. So the acid test for me really, though, in terms of whether generations matter or not, is the extent to which clients come to me and my team and ask for our support in answering their key business questions in relation to the new and emerging generations. And just to give you some examples of the types of questions we get asked, we get the nervous, oh, but generation now, they're just like millennials, right? We get the stark realization that this might be a generation which never even sets foot in a physical retail environment. We get the concerns and anxieties around the fragmentation of media channels, which has been brought about by the proliferation of the different ways in which consumers interact and engage with media. And you can't come to a conference like this anymore without being engaged in the conversation about AI or AR. It's the new big data conversation, and everyone's scrambling to understand how this particular generation will feel about and will engage with these types of emerging technologies. So if you don't want to take my word for it, take an example from Air France. So Air France recently held a 2-day hackathon with 54 members of Generation Now to essentially fuel their innovation pipeline and understand what future air travel is going to look like. So that, from my perspective, is a pretty ballsy move to focus in so much on one segment, but it really reflects to what extent this segment could potentially shape how we need to innovate and create for this new future segment of consumers. So let's dig deep into some of the values. So what we've got in terms of rising values of importance for Generation Now are things like creativity, internationalism, ambition, equality, knowledge and learning. And these are all about acceptance, inclusivity, dare I say it, quite liberal sensibilities. But as is interestingly as the rising values, we look at some of the declining values, and it's sex and being youthful. So what is it which is driving the shift from the exuberance of youth to a more conservative with a small c mindset? So the first thing which is interesting to me is individuality is on the wane. So they no longer want to buy products and services which make them stand out. And what we saw is the statement, my individuality is reflected in how I look and what I buy, is the fastest declining life attitude globally, and it's being driven by this segment. In addition, and unsurprisingly, given this is the most diverse segment we've seen, there's this whole drive in terms of social tolerance and respect, and a general feeling that we must understand why we are different and really respect that as a consumer group. So one of the biggest examples or manifestations of this has been how gender distinctions are being neutralised. So in terms of popular culture, what we're seeing are things like CoverGirl has their first male spokesperson. I was in Tokyo a couple of weeks back, and the leading trend at the moment is Kai, which is genderless. And in China, one of the most popular boy bands is actually made up of females. At the same time, toy manufacturers are completely stripping gender references out of both their packaging and their marketing. So how do we see them as themselves? So there's this real strong sense of self and social sensitivity, but at times this can be contradictory. So as you can see here, they still want to be seen to have their own way of doing things, but they want to also be able to share with others. So should future innovations focus on those mutual needs which can be targeted at the cohort? And they also want to feel respected and be seen as a good listener. And this really reflects the way that any interaction with brands at the moment needs to be seen as a two-way conversation. So a really nice example of this, what we can see from marketing campaigns, is where rather than pushing the marketing campaign to the consumer group, they actually see brands wanting to co-create with them. We've been talking for years and years about how experiences are more important than features. But what Nikon have done here in a very challenging category, digital imagery, is they've gone out to this generation and asked them to use their products to co-create and show what are the experiences which they hold dear to themselves. And this has gained really good traction for Nikon. Another big thing is this generation is stressed. So as you can see, the majority of them have a major stress, and this has been driven by the pressure they put on themselves and by concerns around money. And half of them don't feel they have enough free time. So what's driving this? First things first, the spectre of the financial crisis still looms large over this generation, and thrift is one of the key values for this generation, more so than any other generation set. And in this time of relative instability in terms of the political and social environment, there are some strong security concerns which are arising with this generation. So how is this going to manifest itself in potentially how they interact with the tech world? So this generation is more likely to turn off its location services, cover its webcam, go incognito on their browser, and actually look into the privacy settings on the social media sites they go into. So for quite a while now I've been saying we should watch this, and people are going, nah Ben, they're just going to want free stuff, they're going to tick anything. I'm not so sure about that, and I think people need to be careful in terms of how they use this generation's data and how they communicate that to them. Now this is one of the most interesting things I find from the data set on Generation Now. And for me, it sort of jars and it's a bit ironic. So whilst at this time we've got this rise in these mature values, they are actually growing up later. So as you can see here, compared to the millennials, less of them are moving out, less of them are getting married, less of them are having their first child, and more of them are moving back home. So to be provocative, are we talking about a generational set here who are stressing about the world and the reality, but doing it from the relative safety of their mum and dad's spare room? But to be fair to them, this shift has not happened just with this generational set, but it's happened over decades. And as you can see here from this University of Michigan study, you can see that these milestones, driver's license, ever dated, tried alcohol, work for pay, have been getting less and less prevalent over time. So this is a shift we have always seen, but it's for the first time we've seen it with the values at the same time becoming more mature and adult-like. So how does this actually change behaviours? So what we're seeing for this generation versus all adults is them using more phone coupons, they're using more online coupons, they're buying more used items, and they're buying less expensive no-name brands. And when we look at the attitudes around brands, we can see driving up is this feeling that the most important thing about brands is good value for the money, whilst at the same time, what's tanking is their attitude towards liking to buy prestigious brand names and products. Convenience is still key. So for this generational set, this ranks 15th of the most important attitudes versus 21 for the millennials and the rest of the population for that matter. And they are more digital, they are more tech savvy, but it's not a thing for them. It's not something that they say about themselves, it's just part of their fabric. So what does this mean for retailers and manufacturers in this environment? So the first thing I would say is you cannot overplay the technology thing. So technology is important, but it can't be technology for the sake of it being technology. It has to relate to some of the values which we hold dear to themselves. Secondly, there is this shift to looking at brands more in terms of their value for money than their prestige. As I said earlier, they're looking less likely to stand out on more brands which help them to be seen how they want to be seen, to be respected, to be seen as a good listener, to allow them to co-create, to achieve value for money. And anyone looking to develop a brand for this generation must acknowledge those facts. And finally, in terms of the retail environment, and I know this is nothing new, but we've still got to drive for convenience. And as we saw this morning from MediaMarkt, we've got some fantastic examples of how they're leveraging technology and AI to do that. This generation, wherever they are going to need more and more convenience to interact with retail and manufacturer brands. So that's all I was going to present to you today. I'm around for the rest of the conference today, wanting to discuss more around the data we have in this area, and I'll be very happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Ben. Does anybody have any questions? Get onto Slido and pop your questions down there as well, please. I mean, from my perspective, obviously I'm quite a long way from Gen Z, I'll be honest. How do you think that the retailers can also have all this in mind to target Gen Z without alienating some of the older generations as well? That's quite a difficult balancing act if you've got a cross-border.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we saw a good example. I'll use MediaMarkt again because everyone saw it this morning. It's this multi-platform play. So clearly, especially in the tech consumer durable space, which we play in majorly now, there are different segments which need catering for. And what you need to do is essentially have a portfolio play around the different ways in which you engage with them. So if you generally want to go for separate generations or separate consumer segments, then you have to be in different areas, you have to engage with different channels, but you also, when you do engage with those different channels, you do have to tailor them for the needs set of that particular segment.
Absolutely, quite a juggling act.
Indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Ben.
Thanks.
Thank you.